Scotty from Zenium Real Wealth, and this is Thursday lunchtime. G'day to everyone who's having lunch and tuning in, viewing us live online on Facebook and YouTube, and for everyone else who's listening to us afterwards on our podcast or watching the videos. Today is our Q&A in the month, so we always have an open Q&A, and we get some questions in from our clients and from others that are watching. And this one's a little bit special because we've got someone who is actually able to answer some of those technical questions. And today I'm joined with Ross McKay, who is a building inspector. G'day, Ross. How you going?
I'm very well, Scott. Yourself?
I'm well. So to give everyone some background, Ross is our building inspector. He's the guy that we use wherever we can when we're buying property for people. We have done so for a long time. I don't know how long.
A number of years.
more than a number. And Ross has always been very helpful for our clients. There's been plenty of times when those reports that you get from the building inspector are quite large because they have to be. There's a lot of disclaimers in there, and he has a tendency to cut through to the important things, and even been involved in some repairs for the sellers and the buyers and things like that. So it's pretty helpful, that type of service of a decent building inspector. The other claim to fame I've got for Ross is that about 3.5 years ago, we did a video. You remember that, Ross?
I do remember that, actually.
Yeah, so we did a video, and here we are here. You haven't changed. I look different. And mate, I've got to tell you, I don't know if people can see this, but it's got 26,000 views. Like, you have eclipsed all my other videos I've ever done. You're a star, mate. What's the secret?
Well, maybe it's real advice.
Yeah. So I know that you and I did this of a new property, wasn't it?
It was.
Chatting,
yep.
Going through, and there you are. Oh, maybe you do look a bit younger. I don't know.
I think so.
Bits and pieces going through there, and yeah, that was of a brand new property, and we're doing the inspection there with the tagging on the blue dots and the red dots through the place, and looking at a whole bunch of stuff. And look, it's actually got a heap of comments too. Some people saying, "Oh, thanks, Ross, for this and that." So it was important, mate. I just wanted to show you that because what you do is quite important. And it's actually enjoyable for those in YouTube land.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you reminded me about that because up until recently I'd forgotten we'd actually done it. You forget about these things, don't you?
Yeah, it was iPhone special, that one, mate. iPhone special. All right, so we'll get back to the real nitty gritty over here, and mate. All right, so I put it out there that I wanted to say, look, there was an open Q&A, but you're also going to give us your top 5 tips when you come to look at a property. Obviously, this is for people who, before they engage a building inspector, this is just on their initial inspection, and it's a property that they've seen that they like, and they're doing inspection. Mate, could you give us a top 5 or however many you got there, tips that would be really beneficial to even, I guess, classify a property good or bad before even having to engage your type of services?
Yeah. Well, I'll actually give you, number 1 was what my father taught me. And he said, never buy on the bottom of a hill because all the water runs downhill. So I would always think that would be an important thing to consider. If you're on the bottom of a hill in a street, if there's a flood or anything, you're first to go. All the water table that naturally seeps below the ground and runs down through the ground below houses always ends up at your block. So you're always going to have a wet piece of dirt. Yep. Or you're going to have to spend a lot of money with below ground drainage and things to control it. So that would be an important thing to think about. I would probably try and steer away from being near the bottom of a hill.
Yep.
If you're on any other block of land, I would always probably, if I had a choice, I'd probably try and select a flat block, but not necessarily a flat block on the side of a hill where you, again, might have some water issues from upper blocks. You also have a responsibility of retaining walls and things to maintain as well. So there's extra costs involved for future. I think generally, if you were looking around a property, I think you would probably want to consider what sort of a person you were in relation to hands-on handyman or don't really want anything to do with it. So that might decide whether you want to buy a timber home or a brick home. So there might be some considerations there in relation to responsibility of maintenance. I think the obvious things I would keep my eye out for, but we can all see when we walk off the footpath onto a property, you don't have to be an inspector to see things like a rusty guttering and cracks in the walls and cracks in the driveway and so forth. So if there was some real standout things that rung a few alarm bells, they probably are accurate, and you could get expert advice if you wanted to really pursue that block, but otherwise maybe that may not be the one for you.
Yeah, that's good, mate. Appreciate that. And look, I guess there's some real working backwards. Keeping your eyes open. That's pretty apparent. I mean, if you do see something, take a note of it and at least ask a question about it, either to the agent or the seller. Hey, why has that door got one hinge?
Yeah, exactly right.
Or why doesn't that door close? Is that an alignment issue of the door, or has the whole house moved?
Yeah.
There's some things there that are important to take note of.
Yep, we see probably those little things all the time, like minor maintenance items. But if we often see things that a buyer or an agent may not even see, and that might be in relation to drainage down the hill below ground. It's gone underneath a concrete slab and it might lift the house up in the middle. And we might see a garage floor that's actually got a 25 mil fall in one side, but no one sees it because they're so used to seeing it. But we see it because we've sort of got trained eyes to see it. So there's always things that you won't see that an inspector will see. So I would always recommend that you get an inspector to come and take a look if you're ever considering buying a property, just because of the cost involved with the initial purchase.
Yeah, that's a good point. And look, we'll circle back to the how to choose an inspector shortly. So
Yep.
I just picked up on some things there on, to me, there's a lot of this sort of stuff is talking about moisture and water and drainage. That's obviously a highly important part of how the property is standing on the block and things like that.
It is. It's probably number one. It's from both outside coming in and inside going out. So outside we see factors like sloping yards towards the house as opposed to sloping away from the house. So all the moisture is sitting against the walls. We might see surface grates in the lawn, but they're only designed to take heavy rainfall off the top. They don't actually dry the soil out where it all is laying below the grass. So we need to think about, does the place need aggie drains put in below the soil to keep a consistent soil moisture base all around the house? Because you don't really want to have a wet side and a dry side, because then you start to get the house to twist in the soil and things like that. So there's lots of things to consider from the outside. Poor rusted gutters and things like that add to it, because they're always dropping water right beside the house. That can affect foundations. We can get a bit of movement and cracking. It's an attractant for termites, so we try to control moisture from that point of view as well. And on the inside of the house, well, when we get to see things like leaking pipes, we can see shower leaks. Depending on the age of the property, we sort of got to get a bit of an idea as to whether the showers had waterproof membranes, didn't they? So there's different, when you do have a waterproof membrane, a lot of people think that they're not going to have any leaks, but in actual fact, if the silicon around the base, for example, is poor, then the moisture can get behind the tile and track along behind the tile and rot out your door frame. So we look for different clues for different ages of houses. Sometimes we can see the bottom row of tiles in a shower is slightly darker than all other tiles, and that's a bit of an indicator that it's sucking moisture up. So every tiler always finishes with a full row of tiles on the top row because it looks best. but the bottom row gets cut. And when they cut it, they take the glazed edge off the tile, and it's a bit more like a biscuit in a coffee cup, and it just sucks all the moisture up. So there's a lot of things we look for when walking around, and all of those add up to a cost for somebody. It's got to always be fixed. We don't want any leaking water in the house. It's going to present not only damage to timbers and things, but it's a bit of a health risk when you got mold and things like that. So there's a lot of things to consider. Yeah.
So there's a couple of things there that leads me to ask you, talking about timbers and water. And I know that this is slightly not your specific area, but termites, especially in Queensland. So whilst I know that you're not necessarily commenting on termites from a pest perspective, I know that you and I have inspected buildings that have had termite damage and or attempted termite repair. I know one in particular that we inspected up in the roof and stuff. What have you seen? You know, there must be a great range of quality in terms of the end result of repair. Can you just go through a couple of examples you've seen on that?
So I suppose I do get to see a lot of homes with termite damage. Sometimes they're ones that we inspect and we find the damage. Sometimes I'm called to a house because it's got damage, and in all cases they probably want to know how they got in and all that sort of thing, but that's more for the timber pest inspector to establish and recommend protection and termite management moving forward and things like that. But probably the cause of most of the termites that get into a property is probably through a few little basic mistakes, like leaving a tap dripping on the outside, someone putting a side fence in and they put the fence post up against the side of the house and put it down in the dirt, and all those sorts of things are just the natural invitation for termites to come up, because they're all subterranean, they all live in the ground, and as soon as you put something in the ground that they like to eat, well, first thing they want to do is eat it. So it's if you have a timber pest inspection, they give you some good advice on how to prepare the outside of your house. But when they do get in there, depending on the species and how long they've been in there, they can really make a mess. I've seen houses, I think the worst one I've seen was about $240,000 worth of damage. Generally, if we catch them out, it's probably smaller, 5 to 10,000, I would say. But the secret to all of it is probably getting a regular inspection. If you don't know much about termites, get a professional in to check it out and make sure he gives you some good advice and follow his advice. Because if you don't, you'll be probably the next. I think it's 1 in 3 houses or something like that is the statistics of the life of a home that will have termite damage within the home. So
wow, that's heaps.
It's a lot, isn't it? Over the course of the life of a house. So there are lots of things anyone could do to minimise that. Keeping your yard dry is a good start, because termites are drawn to water and timber. So if you don't have any timber in the ground, you don't have any moisture, they're probably going to look elsewhere. So that immediately takes some pressure off your own home. Don't stack firewood up against the side of the house and things like that, because they're just going to nest in it and find their way into your house. I actually saw a house one day that had a shovel leaning up against the side wall. The termites had mudded up the shovel handle and got through the weatherboard and got into the house that way, because it had been against the house for that number of years. So.
That's unbelievable. Yeah. So, okay, so termites are a big one in terms of the repair. I mean, is it true you can lie in your house at night and hear them eating the timber?
I would think that would be true, yeah.
Okay.
Particularly if you thought you heard something, probably the best thing you could do to confirm that you heard something is just to give the wall or the floor a whack, because that's when you'll hear the noise. They get their little antlers and start rubbing them together to warn all the others, and that's the noise you'll hear. Right. So you can definitely hear them in the wall if there's enough of them in there. Okay. I have heard of cases where people have been in bed and the bed's fallen through the floor during the night.
Why are we laughing? It's even funny.
I know.
It's horrible. Oh,
which
my goodness.
Tragic.
All right. Yeah, it's not good.
It's not good.
Okay, and obviously you're based in Queensland, so you see a bit of termites, but I mean the same thing can apply in some other states as well.
Yeah, so Queensland's a bad state for them. Generally, the warmer the climate, the probability of termites is greater, and there's different species as you go up the coast. The further you go, the more aggressive they become. But that doesn't rule out places like Melbourne. Melbourne has termites, but it just seems to be in certain suburbs, certain soil types, probably. You can still have suburbs down there where it's legal to put a timber post in the ground. So it's just completely different to up here. So again, advice from a pest inspector or pest controller would be the best thing you can do there to find out what to do with your property.
And okay, so now we'll circle back to when you're actually doing the inspection. You have a fairly methodical process when you do an inspection. So for example, to put it in perspective, we're looking at a property for a client. We've done our initial inspection, gone, oh yeah, it looks pretty good. We're going to make an offer on that. We get our offer, say, okay, subject to building and pest, right? So now I call Ross, in you come, and we always attend those inspections. So, but you seem to have a process, mate. Can you give us a high-level overview of what you look at when you walk through do you start the ground, do you start the roof? Like, how does it work?
So I suppose it all starts in the street when you pull up. It's the perfect opportunity to look at the whole lay of the block. So I can instantly decide whether the right-hand side of the property is going to have more issues related to moisture than the left. So that will be an area that I'm drawn to straight away. And I'll remember that when we're on the inside, ensuring that we're moisture testing that wall and taking a lot of notice, because I noticed that it's highly likely that we might strike some issues inside there in relation to moisture. So they're the initial things you'll assess from the street. Probably other things from the street would be large trees, overhead power line connection, just making sure that it's not hooked up in any trees. And I'd follow that wire all the way to the house and just ensure that it's connected to the house properly. Sometimes we rock up to a property and it's hanging off on one screw and no one's ever noticed it, and it's only one gust of wind away from landing on the ground. So they're probably the initial things, but we do have a bit of a process in that we do all the outside first. So we'll inspect the outside of the walls and the eaves and the gutters, the fencing, drainage, any attached things like patios, pergolas. We'll move on to outbuildings, swimming pool. We don't actually inspect the pool anymore. It's got taken out of the Australian standard, but I always cast my eye over it just to make sure there's nothing obvious like all the water's laying up one end or a big crack or a fence panel missing, which might be a bit of a danger to somebody.
So,
and then,
Ross, on that, why was it taken out of the Australian standard? Was to make it its own inspection, or they just didn't
I think
care
so.
anymore?
Yeah, I think it was to make it its own inspection. Like a concrete structure is a structure, and anyone can virtually look at it to see where there's a crack. I don't think that is probably the issue of it so much. I think it's more to do with how the pool is built in relation to all its pumping systems and filtration systems, and that's really a specialist area altogether. We can't say to someone, yeah, the pool's fine, because I haven't done a test on the pump. We're not licensed electricians, we're not licensed plumbers, and I think therefore we can't write a written report on those things because of those licensing restrictions. So within any building and pest report, there's always some exclusions, and that's in the Australian standard for everyone to see, and I put that on the pre-engagement agreement when I send it out to let them know. And when the buyers rock up to a house, I always let them know can't allowed to test all your electrical items, so that's something good for you to do while you're in there with your agent. You can go and check the air conditioner and check the cooktop and those sorts of things. We'll always look at those items from a point of view of condition. So if we look at a cooktop and it's got a big crack through it, well, that's a safety concern. So it would be in the report, but recommended to an electrician to further investigate and advise.
Right.
We can't sort of do that next step because we're not qualified electricians and so forth. So it's the same back to the pool with all the pumps. There's so many different types of pumps and filtration systems and chlorine and salt, and it really is a specialised thing in itself. I've seen pool inspectors take just as long to explain everything about one pool as it takes me to do the whole house. So
Yeah.
it'd almost add another hour to an inspection to just do a proper inspection of a pool. So.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. So you cast over the pool and that sort of thing, and then you move keep going up the house, do you?
Yeah, continue going around the house and the driveway, and obviously illegal construction. So we all know how things are supposed to be put together. Generally, if they're not put together in accordance with the code, then we have to recommend why we think there's an issue, and then that should be further investigated, or you should check with local council and just make sure there's building approvals for those things. Right. Then obviously we get up and over the roof if we can reach it, and then move inside.
And do you get to see a lot when you get into the ceiling cavity? I mean, is it like the hidden stories of the house? What do you find up there?
Yeah, well, we find lots of things out there. Probably some I can't say now, but I suppose when I could comment on, I find a lot of ashtrays up there. So I think it must be the hidden spot where a few people go for a smoke. But,
serious?
We find lots of things in the roof, and there are restrictions, of course, because there's low areas where you can't crawl to. There's insulation that covers lots of timbers, sarking underneath the tiles and so forth. So ducting, ducts running everywhere. There's always limitations, but we do get a good look, and we often find things in the roof, like even if we found some termite damage down the skirting board or a wall, we'll generally find some more evidence in the roof, and it sort of gives us a better overview of the whole property.
Yeah, okay. And so you do your report and you give those really long ones there, which is obviously from some sort of app software thing with
software,
a template. Yep. Okay. And are you you're just to report on a building? Like a building inspector is just to report on the building? Do they make recommendations, or how does that side of it work?
Yeah, so you're always got to sort of look at what the problem is, where the problem is, why it's a problem, and who you should get out to rectify the problem. So the report identifies issues and steers you in the direction of the specialists that you should be engaging to further investigate those items. So right. For an example, I suppose if we had it looking at a patio out the back, it had some rotten timber, I would probably recommend that you get to further investigate with a carpenter and let him give you a price on replacing those timbers so that you know what sort of costs you're up for straight up.
Yeah. Okay. So you talked earlier about having a dedicated inspection for a pool, and then the hot plates and the sparky and stuff like that.
Yeah.
In all our contracts, we put building and pest inspection. That's like the absolute default of what we do.
Yep.
And we say and/or pool inspection because we understand where that is. Are we getting to the stage now with the way that things are written and the way that I guess the world works with litigation, other bits and pieces, that when we buy a house, is it overkill to have building, pests? If it's got a pool, do we need a sparky? Do we need a plumber inspection? Like, where do we start? Where do we stop?
I suppose the answer is, if you had all of those inspections, you've ticked all your boxes. If you were wanting to get the minimum, I'd probably get a building and pest as a minimum. And it'd probably depend with those other things like electrician, it'd probably more depend on the age of the house. If it was built in the last 10 or 20 years, it's got double insulated wire. It's all been built to the modern codes. The wiring, I mean, we can comment if we see that wires have been eaten by rats or things like that. So apart from that, it really should be pretty good. If the house was 90-year-old and it had some wires with some old cloth over the top and the cloth's worn away and you got wires rubbing together, well, I would highly recommend that electrical inspection was done. So it's just, I suppose, as we see it, because they're all slightly different.
Yeah, no, that's very cool. Okay, so that leads us to probably my last question is that you have a relatively large amount of experience. I mean, your website says 27 years. I mean, that can't be the case. You can't look old enough to have 27 years experience.
Well, it's actually about 33 now.
Well, there you go. That's amazing. So, but in all seriousness, how does someone, I mean, if I just jumped on and Google, which I haven't done because we use you, but if I jumped on and Google like a local building inspector, I'm sure I'm going to get a whole range of results. How does someone choose between the guy that has done, like, what do you need? What's the qualifications needed to be a building inspector? Is it a ticket? Do you have to be a builder? Like, what is it?
Yeah. So first of all, you need to be a builder, and then you have to have done a completed residential building inspector's course. You can't continue to renew your license if you don't have a building license, like they go hand in hand. It's probably always a good idea to ask a few questions when you're engaging a building inspector. When you, for an example, if you get a builder's license, depending on when you got it, it might have just been a 2-day course. You only needed 10 years experience and you got a builder's license. So it could be someone who had 10 years of experience doing extensions and renos and things like that, or someone who was a quantity surveyor and he just decided to get a builder's license, and then we both got a builder's license, so therefore we can both become building inspectors. So those people are out there. I'm not saying that some don't know what they're talking about. Some probably do, some probably don't. But I would ask questions before you just jumped onto the cheapest price you could get. I think that's probably the last thing that you should consider as your key element. I would really encourage you to ask questions about how qualified people are, how long have they been doing it, and get a feel for the person who's going out there, that you feel confident that he's there with your best interest at heart. He's got enough experience to let you know exactly what you're buying, so you can make an informed decision.
Yeah, no, that's good. No, that's really good. Well, I think our YouTube video from 3 years ago has proved that this type of information is highly in demand and popular. I mean, we literally did it off the cuff, and and I haven't promoted or anything. I think we sent it to the database once just to say, hey, here's our latest video. But all the views have been on the organic YouTube side of things. When are we going to do some more videos, Ross?
Well, that sounds like an invitation to me, so I think we should talk more about that. It's funny you say that. I'm just in the process of building a new website, and I just wanted to look around for a little bit of to see what everyone else was doing, I suppose. And I had a look at YouTube and just put in building inspector, and I was quite amazed to see me pop up. I'd forgotten we'd even done it, and I think I was more amazed to find out that at the time, it was only a month ago, that it had 24,000 views or something then. So it's amazing. Yeah,
it's still sitting about 1,000 views a month. It's just, there you go. So yeah, look, I think we definitely could do some more videos, and perhaps about specific topics. I think that the termites thing is important. I often get asked about that. I think the moisture and the mold thing is really important. Mold seems to be coming as properties age and that ventilation issues happen. That's becoming a lot more. We're seeing that prevalent. The other thing, which I'm going to throw this into you before we go, and we can. I don't know if you've had any experience with it, because I haven't talked to you about it. But the other thing we're seeing in some places in southeast Queensland is essentially meth houses or drug-affected houses. Have you had any experience with that yet?
Yes, just last week, actually.
There you go.
There's a timber pest company that I use. There's a few different companies that I use, and they have now moved into meth testing as well. And it was actually the first one that I'd seen done. And it's basically sort of like almost like a pregnancy test sort of thing. And you just take a few swabs and put it into the little machine that sort of gives you a couple of lines and let you know if it's positive or negative. And if it's positive, then I think there's a little bit more that goes into it, where they send it off to the laboratory and do a little bit more intense looking at the swab. But yeah, it is popping up, and I think if I've had one, that will only mean that there are going to be more. So I think it is definitely something moving forward.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think you're correct. I think we're seeing it more from the property management side with our contacts in that, and there's a lot of training
Yep.
going on that, and we'll probably run another Q&A event with a property manager specifically about that sort of stuff as probably early next year.
Yep.
So, all right, well, that's probably that's it. Unless there's any other tips you want to throw in, we try and keep it at 30 minutes, mate. So I'm going to wind it up shortly. If there's anything else you want to tell everyone, be my guest.
No, I think the last point I made about how you decide who you're going to use, I think it's just a matter of comparing cost versus value. You're not always going to get value if you're getting a cheap inspection. You really want to, if you're spending $500,000 on something, you really want to get a quality inspection and make sure that you're not going to miss anything. So I just ensure that you ask the right questions to whoever it is that you want to do the inspection for you.
Yep, no, that's really good. And mate, thank you very much for your time on our show today. As a reminder for everyone who is watching and, of course, listening, if you have any questions about this or any other topic, feel free to hit us up at hello@xenium.property. So there's no .coms, no .aus. It's just xenium.property. So that's XENIUM.property. And if you want to be put in touch with Ross, hit us up on that as well, and we can put you in touch with Ross, or we can help you find an inspector in your local area if you're in Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide,
Absolutely.
Perth, whatever.
Yep.
We can do that, help you with that process. And for everyone else who is not a member of Xenium, you need to be. You need to join. Go to all the w's.xenium.property/join. So that is www.xenium.property/join. You get to join up to Xenium for free. You get all this sort of information. You get our back catalogue of videos and content, and you get updated with all the stuff that we're doing, including these lives and other bits and pieces, lots of helpful tips. So that is worthwhile as well. Ross, thank you very much again. I'm going to take you up on your offer, which I'm not sure you gave, but I kind of gave for you to do more videos.
I think it'll be fun.
Yeah, I look forward to that in coming months. Thank you for your time. This is Scotty from Xenium Real Wealth talking to Ross McKay from Insight Building Inspections, and that's all from today. Till next time.
Good on you. Thank you for
See
your
ya.
time. Bye.